there, this is John from Heroes and Legends. Welcome to day 8 of official Oath of the Gatewatch spoilers. So today we have 9 cards to take a look at, as well as 1 card that was previously leaked that has now been confirmed. So tomorrow we'll be back with 1 more spoiler video, and then starting on Friday we'll begin our full set review. Hopefully get you prepared for that pre-release coming up. So if you haven't subscribed yet to the channel, definitely a good time to do so. And having said that, let's jump into the cards. First we have Mina and Denn, Wildborn, and this was the card that was previously leaked. So we have talked about this in length in a previous video, so I won't go into crazy detail here, but I will say this is a very good card. It has a built-in exploration, you get a 4/4, and the ability to return a land to your hand so you can play it again to get all sorts of landfall effects, including the trample effect that you'll get for returning it to your hand. So this is very, very good. The only thing that's a little awkward about this is landfall hasn't really gotten there in standard. Will there be enough tools in Oath of the Gatewatch for it to get there? That remains to be seen. At this point, I'm not so sure, but it is going to be a limited bomb for sure. Alright, let's move on to the new cards, and the first one is Thought Not Seer. 1 colorless, 3 generic. It's an Eldrazi 4/4. When Thought Not Seer enters the battlefield, target opponent reveals his or her hand. You choose a non-land card from it and exile that card. When Thought Not Seer leaves the battlefield, target opponent draws a card. So here's the thing I like about this card. Just the casting cost is very, very economical. You get a 4/4 for 4. Now it doesn't have evasion, but it's still a pretty big body, and you get the Thoughtseize effect. Now if it does leave the battlefield, they do get to draw cards, so it almost feels a little more maybe like a Vendilion Click sort of thing, but at the same time, this is still very economically costed. The big question in my mind is, with this colorless mana, is how hard is that going to be to incorporate into a deck in the current metagame? I talked a little bit about this yesterday. This could see some standard play if a deck can smooth out the colorless mana issue. Maybe that's what Pain lands. Remains to be seen. So it'll be interesting to see how easy or hard this is to do as we go forward. Next we have Relief Captain. 2 white, 2 generic. It's a 3/2 Core Knight ally, and when this enters the battlefield, you get to support 3. The only thing awkward about this card, and first off I'll say this is relegated to limited. This is a limited card, but what's awkward is it does cost 2 white, and when you're looking at 2 white and 2 generic, that could be tough to cast in certain decks. So your 4 drop spot may be better used with something else. Now if you are all in on the wide strategy, whether that's some Scion tokens or allies or what have you, this is a fine card. You're certainly going to consider it, but it might not always make your cut because of the casting cost. Next card comes to us from a French language spoiler, and it's Dimensional Infiltrator, a blue and a generic. It's an Eldrazi with Devoid, Flash, and Flying. It's a 2/1, and you can pay a colorless and a generic. Exile the top card of target opponent's library. If it's a land card, you may return a Dimensional Infiltrator to its owner's hand. Well, this is very interesting. So first off, it's very cheaply costed, and it has evasion, so that's kind of nice. Flyers are definitely a commodity in this limited environment, so a 2/1 for 2 with flying is good. Its ability is very intriguing to me, though. Just the fact that this doesn't tap. As long as I have colorless mana to pour into this, I can just keep exiling cards. It just becomes a lot more deadly than, say, those ingest creatures that are small that we saw in the last set. Having said that, in limited, yeah, I think this is a very viable card. In the early game, it gets damage across. In the late game, as long as you have the colorless mana to support it, you might be able to even mill your opponent out depending on what other exile type effects you're playing. So this could definitely be a big player in limited. As far as standard goes, I don't know if it'll quite get there. Again, the colorless piece might just be too much of an obstacle to make this a truly great card in standard constructed. Next we have Gift of Tusks. This is a blue instant. Until end of turn, target creature loses all abilities and becomes a green elephant with base power and toughness 3/3. Interesting card. So very similar to Turn to Frog. Costs 1 generic less than that, but instead of an 0/2 creature, you're turning something into a 3/3 creature. Now this has some implications. Turning your own small creature into a 3/3 could be a nice combat trick, and you could perhaps get across with some damage in another situation. Or you can take away an ability that's really bothering you, that's causing you problems for a turn off one of your opponent's creatures, or you can shrink down one of their large Eldrazi's and maybe use that as a combat trick. So it is removal for blue, but it's a little conditional. But the upside is it can also be used as an aggressive card in certain situations. So I find it very interesting. I think it's a really fine limited card. It might not always make your cut. It's just going to depend on what type of deck you're playing. And it's a great sideboard card, though, depending on what you're playing against. I don't really think it's going to get there in standard, though, just because it's a little inconsistent as to what the results are going to be in any given situation. And this would have been more playable, even if it costs a little more, but it could target maybe any permanent, like could catch a planeswalker, sort of like Beast Within. That would be a little different, but as it stands now, I think this will just be a limited card. Next we have Jacques Avenger, and this costs a blue and 4 generic for a Sphinx 3/3 with flying, and it has a surge cost of a blue and 2 generic. Okay, this is another one of those cards that will be relegated to limited, but it's an okay limited card. Flying is a commodity, like I said earlier, and a 3/3 for 5 with flying is probably just good enough to play and not feel bad about it. The surge cost is phenomenal, so if you're playing a 2-headed giant pre-release, now this card becomes a lot better. It just becomes so much more economical. And don't forget too, there's things like Bonesaw that cost 0 that you might be able to use to put out and then switch over to the surge cost. That would be pretty cool. So keep those sort of synergies in mind. But overall, I think this is a fine limited card. Next card comes to us from another Japanese language spoiler, and this is Smashing the Skies. 2 blue and a generic. It's an instant with Devoid. Counter target spell. If that spell is countered this way, exile it instead of putting it into its owner's graveyard. So it's basically a disperse with Devoid is what it is, and it's at the uncommon level, so you're going to see a lot of these in your limited games. Fine limited counterspell, pretty economical to counter something for 3, and if you have some processors in your deck, even better. As far as standard goes, there's a lot of choices right now for counterspells as we move forward. There's some other decent ones in this set, and we saw some good ones like Scatter to the Winds in the previous set. So I don't know if a deck's going to necessarily need to go here with this one, at least right now, maybe after rotation. But it's there if we need it in the future. Aside from that, good limited card. Next we have Bearer of Silence. 1 black, a generic. It's an Eldrazi 2/1 with Devoid, and it also has flying and it can't block. And when you cast Bearer of Silence, you may pay a colorless and a generic. If you do, target opponent sacrifices a creature. So this is a very aggressive card. It's at the rare slot, so in limited you won't see a ton of these around. But playing a 2/1 flyer for 2 is always very, very good in an aggressive deck. It's so good that I would say if there is an aggressive deck in standard, maybe a red-black deck of some kind, this could definitely see a role in it. This is a very aggressive, very strong card. And then when you look at the ability on top of it, it's a great ability. It's not always going to be relevant. There's times where your opponent has a token they can throw away or something like that. But just the fact that it's an option just makes this card that much better. And if you're really aggressive and you can get cards like this out early and get your mana up early enough, when your opponent does finally play something that can be used to block your small creatures, this could come into play and take that out. That could be a pretty big deal. So watch out for this one. If that deck exists, this could see some standard play. Aside from that, definitely a great limited card. You don't want it in all your limited decks. It just depends on what you're trying to do. This is for an aggressive build. If you're trying to go a little slower, ramp, control-y build, this might not be the card for you. But in a lot of aggressive builds, this will be great. Next we have Goblin Freerunner. It's a red and 3 generic Goblin Warrior Ally, 3/2. It has menace and has a surge cost of a red and a generic. So paying 4 for a 3/2 menace in limited is just fine. You're not going to be super excited by that point. Your opponent may have 2 creatures out to block it, but it's not the worst thing in the world either. It's not always going to make your cut, but if you need a creature, and you need a creature with quasi evasion some of the time, it's there for you. The surge cost is what makes this a lot better. So again, if you're playing a two-headed giant pre-release a week from this weekend, you're going to be very happy to play with this card. It also gives you an ally trigger. You don't want to overlook that as well. So there are other purposes for it. Having said that, this is a limited card. It's going to stay in the world of limited, but it's pretty good. It's just going to depend on your deck. And finally, our last card of the day is Seer's Lantern. It costs 3 generic. It's an artifact. You can tap it for colorless mana, or you can pay 2 generic and tap it to scry 1. These are fantastic cards in limited builds. I would run one of these very frequently in almost any build, just because I like the ramp. I just like what that can do for you in certain games when you draw it. This is at the common level, so there's going to be plenty of these to go around, and it's another way to make sure you're getting colorless mana, since maybe you're in a draft and you can't get a hold of a waste. Maybe you can get a hold of this and it will help you enable some of the bonus abilities on cards, or help you play 1 or 2 of those colorless creatures. So I do like this, and the fact that it also can scry makes it so that it has a secondary ability that will definitely be relevant, especially in the mid to late game. So really good card. I'm glad that this is here, and I think this is just one of many examples of that we will see at the common level of ways to get colorless mana for your limited cards. Having said that, those are spoilers for today. So we will be back tomorrow one more time with Oath spoilers, and then starting on Friday we will begin our full set review. So as always, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day. Hey, thanks as always for watching. This video, like all my videos, was made possible by the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Even a donation of $1 helps me to keep growing this community and creating better quality videos for all of you. Check out our Patreon page for exclusive giveaways and future goals for the channel. If you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the MTG news, spoilers, set reviews, product openings, or finance videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a good day.